The rain tapped gently against the windows of the Harrington estate in Bath, a sound Isabel had long grown accustomed to. It was the sort of soft, persistent rain that never truly let up, just like the silence in her marriage. The old Georgian house stood regal among rows of immaculate hedges, yet within its walls, something was slowly decaying. Isabel sat at the baby grand piano in the drawing room, her fingers hovering above the keys. It had been years since she'd played anything real. Her talent, once celebrated in concert halls from Manchester to Vienna, now lay dormant beneath layers of obligation and expectation. Richard never liked it when she played. He said it was a distraction. From what, she was never told. That afternoon, as the clock chimed 4, she noticed something strange. Richard was home early. She heard his voice before she saw him. It was low, hurried, as if trying not to be overheard. Isabel remained still, listening. From the crack in the drawing room door, she saw Richard walking briskly across the hall, phone pressed tightly to his ear. "No, it stays under her name," he hissed. "No paper trail. I've handled worse. Just focus on the transfer." Then he disappeared into his study, the one room she was never allowed to enter. The door shut with a soft but definitive click. Locked. As always. Isabel's heart beat faster. Under her name. Transfer. The words whirled in her mind. That evening at dinner, Richard was all charm and crisp shirts. He spoke about his next trip to Edinburgh and the clients he would be meeting. Isabel nodded, like always, even as questions began to gather like storm clouds behind her eyes. Later, when the house fell into its usual heavy silence, she walked past his study again. She noticed it for the first time, a faint line of light beneath the door. And a single, small object sitting forgotten on the floor by the skirting board. It was a USB drive. Isabel picked it up, heart pounding. It was unmarked. Cold to the touch. She looked towards the locked study door, then back at the USB in her palm. In that moment, the silence she had lived with for so long didn't feel quiet anymore. It felt dangerous. 2 days later, Isabel boarded a train to London under the pretense of visiting an old friend. Richard had flown to Edinburgh that morning, and the house finally felt breathable. She wore a coat she hadn't worn in years, one with deep pockets, perfect for concealing things like a USB drive. She didn't go to a friend's. She went to a cafe near Holborn where Clara Whitmore, her former flatmate at the Royal Academy of Music, now ran a small but notable art gallery. They hadn't spoken in nearly a decade. Life had taken them in opposite directions, Isabel into Richard's carefully curated world, Clara into her own unpredictable, vibrant one. When Isabel walked through the door, Clara looked up from behind a stack of papers. "Good Lord," she whispered. "Isabel Harrington. I thought you'd been swallowed by the Bath fog." Isabel gave a soft smile. "I think I have. But I'm crawling out of it." They sat, ordered tea, and exchanged pleasantries. Then Isabel leaned forward and pulled the USB from her pocket. "I need to know what's on this," she said. "And I think you might be the only person I can trust." Clara's smile faded. She took the device, turning it in her fingers. "What is it?" "I don't know yet. But Richard, he's been hiding something. He's using my name for something illegal, I think. I overheard him on the phone." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" Isabel hesitated. "No. But my gut hasn't failed me before. I just never had the courage to listen to it." Clara plugged the USB into her laptop. The screen blinked. A folder opened. Inside were scanned documents, spreadsheets, emails, all stamped with Harrington Legal and Finance at the top. Several documents bore Isabel's name, attached to offshore accounts, listed as the beneficiary of an art logistics company based in Edinburgh. Her signature appeared on forms she had never seen. "I've never signed these," she said, her voice a whisper. Her hands trembled. Clara clicked into a document titled Whitmore Holdings Art Transfer Schedule. Wait, my gallery's listed here, she said. These pieces, these were never in my gallery. Someone's using my name too. The room was still. The cafe noise faded into the background. Two women, both betrayed. Both unknowingly used as pawns. Isabel sat back in her chair. He's laundering money through you. Clara stared at the screen. And through you, Isabel. Isabel swallowed hard. Her heart beat furiously, but her face remained still. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was criminal. They agreed to meet again in 2 days. Clara would make backups of everything, and Isabel would return to Bath as if nothing had happened. As she left the cafe, Isabel caught her reflection in the window. For the first time in years, she didn't look like someone's wife. She looked like someone planning something. And she was. The drive from Bath to Edinburgh was long and winding, but for Richard Harrington, it was merely another performance. He arrived at the sleek hotel overlooking Princes Street, the kind of place that spoke in hushed tones and marble accents. He checked in under a pseudonym. Everything was always under a pseudonym. Upstairs, in his room, he unlocked a briefcase and withdrew a thin folder. Inside were documents for an upcoming acquisition. Another gallery. Another opportunity to shift funds under the radar. His plan was flawless, except for one oversight. He never imagined Isabel would question him. Back in Bath, Isabel played her part perfectly. She returned home, made dinner, folded linen. She didn't ask questions when Richard called only once that night. She even sounded soft, obliging. But behind her quiet manner, she was already packing. Not for escape, but for Edinburgh. Clara had secured a last-minute exhibition spot for her own collection, giving them the perfect reason to be in the city without raising suspicion. Isabel would travel separately, quietly. She had a new burner phone, given by Clara, and a copy of the USB files encrypted and hidden within an email draft only she could access. 2 nights later, as Richard dined with a potential investor at a high-end restaurant on George Street, Isabel arrived in Edinburgh under her maiden name, Isabel Fairchild. She stood outside the same hotel Richard had booked, watching from a distance, her scarf pulled tightly around her chin. The air was bitter, the night clean with frost. But inside her, the heat of anticipation burned stronger than fear. From across the road, she saw him. Richard, dressed in his tailored coat, laughing with the investor. Confident. Polished. Deceptive. He walked straight past her, never looking once. Just as he always did, even when she was right beside him. The following morning, Isabel met Clara at the small gallery tucked off a cobbled lane in Leith. The front room was being prepared for the opening, but they had no time to waste on canvases. They had a new visitor, a solicitor Clara trusted, a woman named Maeve Corrigan, with experience in both corporate fraud and domestic legal cases. Maeve read the documents in silence. She asked careful questions. Then she looked at Isabel. What your husband has done is enough for both a criminal investigation and a civil lawsuit, she said. But more than that, you could lose everything if you don't act soon. Your name is on those records. He's setting you up to take the fall. Isabel said nothing. Her eyes were fixed on a small painting in the corner of the gallery, an oil portrait of a woman with half her face shadowed. Clara followed her gaze. You're not in the shadow anymore, she whispered. Isabel looked back at Maeve. What do we need to do next? Isabel returned to Bath under the same mask she had worn for years, quiet, composed, obedient. Richard was due back the following day. She had less than 24 hours to set the next stage of her plan into motion. Maeve had provided her with everything she needed, preliminary affidavits, timelines, and a list of items to gather. The goal was simple: build a legal wall before Richard could see it coming. But it required precision. One wrong step, and it could all crumble. That evening, Isabel unlocked the attic. It was a place Richard never bothered with. Too dusty, too disorderly. To Isabel, it was a sanctuary of forgotten things. Among boxes of sheet music and old tour posters, she found it, the framed photograph of her mother. Her real mother. Not the stepmother who had taught her to stay small, but the woman who once stood on a picket line outside Parliament holding her daughter's hand, demanding justice. She took the frame from the wall and ran her fingers over the back. Just as she remembered. Taped behind the frame was a key. She had hidden it 15 years ago, on the night she left her old life behind to marry Richard. It belonged to a safety deposit box at a bank in Bristol. The next morning, Isabel took the key and the USB, now in a duplicate form, and caught the 8:10 train. At the bank, she retrieved a small box from deep storage. Inside were old legal documents, a copy of her birth certificate, and, most important of all, a journal. Her journal. She hadn't seen it in over a decade. It was filled with entries written during her first year of marriage. Carefully dated pages documented her growing isolation, Richard's control over her finances, and moments of subtle manipulation she once dismissed as love. She handed it to Maeve that afternoon, who read the first 2 entries with a growing frown. "This is more than emotional neglect," Maeve said. "This shows a pattern. It proves he made sure you had nothing of your own, not even a bank account." Isabel nodded. "He called it simplifying our life. I called it surrendering mine." They filed the first motion that evening. A civil injunction. A quiet freeze on all assets bearing her name. It would take 72 hours to process, just enough time to stay ahead. That night, back in Bath, Isabel waited at the foot of the stairs, hearing the hum of Richard's car in the driveway. She stood. Composed herself. When he walked through the door, he smiled as always, placing his coat on the rack. "Darling," he said. "Miss me?" Isabel returned the smile. "I think it's time we had a conversation." Richard raised a brow. "A conversation?" he repeated, loosening his tie. "About what? The neighbor's new extension? Or the fact that the soup's gone cold?" Isabel didn't flinch. "About the documents I found. And the accounts in my name." That stopped him. For a second, his expression faltered, but only for a second. Then came the smile again, the one he wore in courtrooms and cocktail parties. The smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I have no idea what you're talking about," he said smoothly, crossing to the drinks cabinet. "Is this about money again, Isabel? You've always been easily confused by numbers." She followed him with her eyes, her voice calm. "I have a solicitor now. Her name is Maeve Corrigan." Richard's hand paused mid-pour. A single drop of whiskey spilled on the polished surface. "She specializes in fraud and coercive control," Isabel added. "And she's seen everything. Including the journal." He turned to face her then, slowly. No more smile. No more mask. "You're making a mistake," he said coldly. "You don't understand what you're meddling with." "I understand enough," she replied. "Like the fact that you never needed me, only my name." He stepped closer, voice low. "Do you think anyone will believe you? You've never had a job, never handled our finances. You're the perfect scapegoat." Isabel looked up, steady. "That's why I made copies. And why everything's already with Maeve. Even if you tried to stop me now, it's too late." A silence fell between them. Thick. Unblinking. Then Richard chuckled, just once. "Fine," he said, brushing past her. "Let's see how far you think you can go with this. You've never finished anything on your own. You won't finish this." She didn't move as he stormed upstairs. But her hands clenched at her sides. She waited until the door slammed. Then she picked up her phone. Maeve answered immediately. "He knows," Isabel said. "We're ready," Maeve replied. "We'll file for the emergency protection order first thing in the morning." But Isabel wasn't finished. "There's one more thing," she said. She glanced up the staircase, towards the locked study door at the end of the hall. "I want to see what's behind that door. Tonight." The corridor was silent, cloaked in shadow. Moonlight streamed faintly through the skylight, painting pale squares on the floorboards. Isabel stepped quietly, barefoot, heart drumming in her ears. The key, taken from Richard's coat pocket, felt cold and sharp in her palm. She stood before the study door. This room had always been off-limits. Locked. Dismissed with a smile and a vague excuse, "Just old files, darling. Nothing you'd want to see." But tonight, she needed to see. She turned the key. A quiet click. Then the door creaked open. The air inside was stale, as if time had stopped breathing here. Dust curled in the moonlight like smoke. Shelves lined the walls, neat rows of binders, hard drives, envelopes. A large desk faced the bay window. Upon it, 2 monitors blinked softly, still alive in sleep mode. Isabel stepped in and closed the door behind her. She crossed to the desk, her fingers brushing over receipts, letters, post-it notes filled with scribbles and initials. Everything was alarmingly organized, like the inside of a courtroom mind. But then she opened the top drawer. And froze. Inside were a dozen passports. Not just Richard's. Different names. Different nationalities. Different faces. Some were versions of him, altered by wigs, beards, glasses. Others were completely unfamiliar. Her breath caught. What was this? She rifled through the documents beneath, offshore accounts, forged deeds, contracts bearing her signature, but she had never signed them. One file was marked, Contingency Isabel. She opened it slowly. Inside was a photograph of her. Taken just days ago. Walking alone in the park with her scarf loose and her head down. Beneath it, a note in Richard's handwriting. Keep surveillance until transaction complete. If she becomes unstable, initiate Plan B. Isabel's stomach turned. There was a knock at the front door. She startled, slamming the file shut. No one was supposed to come tonight, not Maeve, not anyone. Her mind raced. Another knock. Louder this time. Then a voice. Male. Familiar. "Isabel, it's Thomas. Please, I need to speak with you. It's urgent." Thomas. She hadn't heard from him in months. Her brother had vanished after their last argument about Richard, how he'd begged her to leave, how she'd refused. Isabel opened the curtain slightly, peering down. It was him. But something about the way he stood, the hurried glances over his shoulder, the fact that he came now, tonight of all nights. It made her hesitate. And in the stillness, she noticed it. Richard's computer screen had blinked out of sleep mode. And a remote session had begun. Isabel dropped to the floor, heart pounding. Someone was controlling the computer remotely, watching her, even now. She shut the drawer slowly, muffling the soft click as it closed, then crawled beneath the desk. Her breath came in shallow bursts as she peered up at the screen. A cursor moved on its own. It navigated to a file directory labeled, Client Contracts RT. She squinted. RT. Then it clicked, Richard Thornton. Dozens of folders were listed beneath. Names. Dates. Code words. Each one had a string of numbers, money, perhaps. Some had red tags marked, closed. Others, still open. The cursor paused, then began opening a folder labeled E.L. Edward Langford. Her blood ran cold. Edward was her old colleague from the hospital. They had exchanged harmless messages for years, catching up occasionally over email. But that folder contained surveillance photos. Logs of their interactions. Transcripts of texts. Richard had been watching them. The cursor flicked again, this time to a folder labeled IT Insurance Policy. Isabel. Her name, her initials. Before she could see more, the screen blacked out. Locked. She scrambled to her feet, heart racing. The knock at the door returned, this time heavier. Urgent. Isabel. It's Thomas. Let me in before he comes back, please. She hesitated. If Richard was monitoring remotely, he could have intercepted Thomas. Or worse, manipulated him. But if Thomas had managed to find her, maybe he had answers. Maybe he knew more. She left the study, locking the door behind her. Her footsteps were nearly silent against the wooden floor as she descended the stairs. She reached the door and pressed her ear against it. Thomas. She called quietly. A pause. Yes. It's me. Please, Isabel, he's not who you think he is. I've been trying to warn you for months. Her fingers trembled on the latch. Prove it. A moment of silence. Then came the answer. I was with Mum the night before she died. You told me to forgive her. That no one escapes the past forever, not even us. Her eyes widened. That memory, only they knew it. With trembling hands, she unlocked the door and pulled it open. Thomas looked ragged. Unshaven. Wet from the rain. But his eyes were alert, his face desperate. I haven't much time, he said, stepping inside quickly. They're watching everything. Not just you, everyone. Richard isn't just lying to you. He's running a syndicate. A real estate cover. Identity fraud. And you, Isabel, you were never meant to survive past this year. She stared at him, barely breathing. What are you talking about? Thomas pulled out a battered folder from under his coat and handed it to her. Inside were photos of Richard, meeting with strangers, exchanging briefcases, kissing another woman in a London hotel. But the most damning thing? A death certificate. Issued 6 months ago. Her name at the top. Cause of death, accidental gas leak. Deceased found unrecognizable. Date of death, next Thursday. She looked up, her face drained of color. Thomas nodded slowly. You're living on borrowed time, Isabel. And they've already written your ending. The morning sun poured through the windows, too bright for such a dreadful truth. Isabel stared at the death certificate in her hands, the edges now crumpled from her grip. The date haunted her, Thursday. Just 5 days left. And if Thomas was right, someone had already scripted her demise. What do they want from me? She asked, her voice hoarse. Thomas closed the curtains quickly and checked his phone. It's not about what they want. It's about what you know, or what they think you might discover. You were married into it, Isabel. A silent shareholder in one of the most elaborate property laundering schemes in the country. The perfect puppet. Respected, soft-spoken, untouchable. She shook her head. No. I never signed anything. You didn't have to, he replied grimly. They forged your signature. Used your name. You were listed as a trustee on 4 separate companies, all registered in offshore accounts. Your approval, on paper, was what allowed the sales to pass without scrutiny. Isabel sat down slowly. Her whole world was unraveling. She remembered the odd financial statements that Richard, used to divert with a smile. Just legal jargon, he'd said. Nothing for you to worry about. But now, everything made sense. Thomas handed her a USB stick. This contains the documents you'll need to prove your innocence. I spent months pulling this together. But it also contains their insurance files, including yours. You need to get this to someone you trust. Who? She asked, her hands shaking. Detective Grace Pennington. Whitehall Cyber Division. She's the only one not on their payroll. Just then, the power went out. The house went silent. Her laptop, still in the study, was dead. Thomas froze. That's them. They're coming. They've killed the grid. Isabel ran to the study, unlocked the door, and grabbed the laptop. She shoved the USB into the port and began copying the files onto a fresh drive from her drawer. 2 minutes, she hissed. I just need 2 minutes. Thomas hovered near the stairs, listening. A vehicle rolled up the gravel drive. Tires crunched. Isabel's eyes locked with his. Go out the back. I'll stall them. He shook his head. You'll never outrun them. Then I won't run, she said, voice steady. I'll fight. She handed him the flash drive. You get this to Grace. No matter what happens. Another knock. This one wasn't hesitant. She walked to the front door, spine straight, hair tucked behind her ears. Her reflection in the hall mirror looked different now. She wasn't the quiet wife anymore. She opened the door slowly. Richard stood there, perfect as ever, wearing his signature grey coat and a smug smile. Darling, he said. We need to talk. Behind him, 2 men in black suits stood silently. She met his eyes, then stepped aside. Of course, she said coolly. Come in. And as they crossed the threshold, she knew, this would end tonight.